we have these passive deficits that are growing. Again, sales tax revenues, income tax revenues, local property tax revenues, state capital gains tax revenues, all taking a nosedive here in California. And we've got this girly man governor who's basically asking for what? For some loans from the federal government. They should be demanding a federal revenue sharing program. It's not a smart use of taxpayer resources to keep pushing it into the banks, and the banks aren't lending it out.
Right.
The federal government needs to start lending it directly and making interest on the loans. And in some areas, not even loans, but grants to state and local governments. They've got to start returning demand to this economy, aggregate demand, effective spending power. And they need to re-regulate the markets. There's a shadow banking system out there that's evaded regulations. There needs to be capital requirements and margin requirements imposed on hedge funds, on the derivatives market, and I think there needs to be a real discussion about the Federal Reserve as well, about having a central bank that is handed over to the industry it's supposed to regulate.
Along the lines of regulation, and keep in mind I'm a 29-year Wall Street veteran, and when I've gone on national TV, when I went on Fox and recommended this, and went back to my office, I thought I was going to be stoned on the way. I recommended two things, two meaningful areas of reform that I thought were very workable on Wall Street. One is that every financial institution that underwrites a deal has to keep a part of that deal.
Yeah.
So, in other words, you just don't do all these securitized obligations with very little due diligence. You don't care what institutional investor is going to hold this at the end and ultimately get burned. You have to hold part of the deal back and in your own portfolio.
Yeah, I like that.
All right. So that was the first suggestion. The second suggestion is that your compensation for investment bankers not be paid in cash at the end of the year as it is right now. Just for our audience's sake, guys who work on Wall Street, they get a base salary that's pretty generous, but more than 3/4 of their compensation is paid in an annual bonus paid at Christmas time, end of year. Well, my suggestion is not to pay these bonuses in cash. Pay it in stock that's vested over 3, 4, or 5 years of period of time. So, in other words, if you're an investment banker at Bear Stearns, and if you were due a $10 million bonus at the end of 2 years ago, you got it paid in cash, and you could have been as reckless and as irresponsible, even to the point of being criminally reckless, and walk away and be on a beach in Fiji right now counting the waves.
Yeah. How about this, John?
Wait, don't interrupt me.
All right.
So if you were paid in Bear Stearns stock, and if Bear Stearns went belly up, you were shit out of luck.
Yeah.
How about this? How about if you
What do you think of that, Tim?
Yeah, no, I support that as well.
All right.
How about if you were paid in foreclosed properties? Here, then you can write it off on your books as a bad debt, or not even as a bad debt. You can write it off as an employee bonus.
Well, let me ask you this, since we're talking about compensation and incentives of executives. The federal government is pumping in hundreds of billions of dollars and really trillions of dollars in guarantees for these Wall Street banks. Rather than waiting for a law that would require tying compensation to stocks instead of cash, how about just demanding that public officials sit on the boards of directors of these financial institutions that are accepting public funds?
And be a shareholder activist in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can be a shareholder activist, on any corporate board, if you're Carl Icahn or what have you, and could be you're rattling sabers and make a career out of that.
Yeah.
Why not have somebody, some representative from the federal government?
There's a huge assumption here, though, John. There's a huge assumption that public officials are doing stuff for the right reasons. That's a huge assumption.
Well, I don't disagree with your point there, and I think if we're going to be having creating, you could say, chains of accountability to elected public officials, it means having some transparency, some light shined on them as well to make sure that they're not engaging in their own kind of self-dealing.
How about electing public officials that don't want to be elected as public officials? That'll be the first
How about
goal.
campaign finance reform?
If you want to run for politician, guess what? You're not eligible.
The jury system, the jury system, the lottery system was used in ancient Athens and ancient Greece.
Huh.
The U.S. jury system is probably one of the less corrupted of our institutions.
Right.
Pulling a man off the street or a woman off the street and having them, represent us in the legislature, I don't think it would be any worse. Quite better than, as you're suggesting, people who have a fixation on the office.
Right.
On the subject of the competence of our elected officials, I've known Barney Frank since 1988 when I was a volunteer in the AIDS services community. Was on the board of AIDS Project Worcester and the Cape Cod AIDS Council. His district, New Bedford, is right by Cape, is kind of the gateway to Cape Cod, and found him to be a supremely decent guy. Just supremely decent guy. He helped argue for HUD Section 8 certificates for people with AIDS, a whole bunch of things. I have enormous respect for Barney Frank, who is now the chair of the very powerful House Financial Services Committee. Also have a lot of respect for Chris Dodd, who's chairs the Senate Banking Committee. And I know him less well, but also have enormous respect for him. And yet, Tim, if a year ago, if I were to go to either guy, Barney Frank or Chris Dodd, and if I were to have put a gun to their head and said to them, what is a credit default swap?
Yeah.
They wouldn't, or what is a structured investment vehicle? If their lives depended upon it, they could not have told me. Why is that?
Well, I worked on the Hill. I worked for Paul Tsongas when he was a senator from Massachusetts.
Right on.
Good guy.
A lot of times it's the members' staff, the staff members who are serving the senator or the congressman, committee staffers as well. Sometimes they're the best ones. They know the details much better. I would imagine people like Dodd and Frank are briefed now and then, but they're briefed on so many different issues that they're not going to retain the kind of level of expertise that you'd normally want. That's part of it. The other part is, credit default swap and derivatives were not widely appreciated by anybody until the past year. And I think part of that was people like Dodd and Frank, as much good as they have done and tried to do, they fell under the spell of Alan Greenspan. The man who could get up there and speak in such obtuse terms that nobody could understand him, and it was mistaken for wisdom and prophecy or something.
And with such eloquence too.
But what he had people convinced that, don't worry, we'll take care of it. You don't need to know what a derivative is. A public official, why would you need to soil your hands with trying to figure out a derivative? The banks can manage their own risk. In fact, that's how we manage our risk, is through these private contracts between us. And, people like Frank and Dodd fell for that. I must say that there were others who used to not fall for that line, such as Henry Gonzalez, who had been the powerful chair of the House Banking Committee before Barney Frank, almost a decade before Frank.
And the horrible thing about this Alan Greenspan is that he may have thought he was doing the right thing the whole time he was in office doing this.
That's true.
And then what happens the year after he gets out, or 2 years after he gets out? Oh, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah.
Not maybe I was wrong.
Excuse me.
Not maybe I was
What the
wrong.
hell have you been doing for 30 years?
Not maybe I was wrong. I was wrong.
Right.
Well, and as as bad as that sounds, though, at least he has admitted past wrongdoing. I'm still waiting to hear Robert Rubin, Phil Graham, Larry Summers.
O.J. Simpson.
All right, let's
on and on.
All right, now that we're on the subject of Lawrence Summers, let's do what we did this morning. Go through the roster of Obama's appointments to the economic team. Lawrence Summers, go for it.
Lawrence Summers was Treasury Secretary when we got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act and deregulated derivatives. He also, by the way, I'd say it was back in the 1980s, he had written an article that got a bit of play, and it was about taxing securities transactions. And it's an idea that makes a lot of sense. Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel laureate economist at Columbia University, favors a financial transactions tax right now. And, when you think about who's benefiting from these bailouts, the financial industry, and yet they don't even have to pay a turnover tax